So does this go out as a video or does it just go out as an audio?
It will be on YouTube, but I think I
Okay,
get maybe
great.
2 or 3 viewers a time.
Yeah, I know how that goes
Yeah,
with YouTube. Yeah.
exactly. All right. Let me just open this up, and then also I have a notes document, so I just want to make sure I have both of them on the screen, and then we will get started. All right, great. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, as many of you know, in a former life, I was a pastor in the United Church of Christ. I love theology still, and I love talking about it when it is a part of the movies and shows and things that we love. And as I think you can all probably tell by now, my goal is not to proselytize in these moments. I don't particularly care what you believe. I just think it's interesting to talk about it from all sorts of bents, especially in a world where, as you've heard me talk about, a lot of people use the theology that I love and care about so much in some pretty terrible ways. And we've recently had a movie that does something very interesting, which is being incredibly critical of the worst parts of the church in very honest and important ways, while at the same time offering kind of a positive image of what faith and theology, and in particular Christianity, but also any faith, could be. And that's Wake Up Dead Man, the latest of the Knives Out movies. So I'm here to talk about it, and I wasn't sure who to get as a guest on it when one of my favorite TikTokers, the Nerdy Priest, who does quick sermons on Sunday, and a lot of just fantastic commentary about faith in the public square and all the ways in which it is used and abused and things like that, as well as a lot of pop culture and media, made a post about this movie that really summarized so many of the things that I loved about it. And so, Reverend Rachel, I'm so glad to introduce you and have you here with us on the podcast today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So before we jump in, give us a quick summary of who you are, what your theological and church background is, and also kind of your background with pop culture and movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I am an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Ohio, and I work as both a parish priest and campus chaplain at Kenyon College, which is a small liberal arts college in central Ohio. I am an ex-evangelical, as the cool people say these days. So I was raised as a Southern Baptist. And it was actually being a student at Kenyon, where I graduated from, that I fell into the Episcopal Church and started a lot of that work of deconstructing sort of that much more fundamentalist conservative background. And then my other secret life is I did a PhD in medieval literature before going to seminary, like the
wonderful.
cool kids do. So then as far as pop culture goes, right, I've always loved media. I joke a lot that my relationship to Star Wars is a lot more consistent than my relationship with Jesus in the trajectory of my life. I think, right, I mean, again, I have a PhD in literature. I love analyzing texts, and I love, whether that is movies or TV shows or books, I like analyzing and criticizing media.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I hadn't known the Star Wars connection, but I'm really glad for it, because I do a Star Wars podcast as well. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And my
I'm a Last Jedi apologist.
Oh, and we're going to talk about it. It's made by Rian Johnson, the man who made this movie. I think there's some strong connections. My term paper in my theology class was on Jesus and Yoda discussing theology. And I think I kind of have a similar idea that I often feel like, you know, a healthier approach to religion is to be able to say, look, we have these texts and we have a community, and the community talks about it and builds meaning from that. And I had a great sociology professor who said, so how is that different from Star Trek fans? How is that different from Star Wars fans, from Lord of the Rings fans? And I think in many ways it's similar, that's often a much more powerful way of approaching these stories.
But I think, and not to get into, we'll get into the Last Jedi of it all, maybe. So if I apologize if I'm jumping out of order in your podcast, but I think that's part of what I like about The Last Jedi is I think it raises a question about religion and fandom, and we can ask, who owns religion? Who owns fandom?
Absolutely.
Is it fanboys? Is there a broader fan base, right? Who owns these things that we care about so much?
And that's the whole. This is going to be a great discussion, because I was wondering how much I could nerd out about that. But to me,
so much. The limit does not exist.
A lot of this movie feels like very similar points that he made in The Last Jedi. Among other things, that we have a priest who's learning that his own failures are what he can use to teach others, and that failures are great teachers. So let's get into the movie, though. This is not a review podcast. I think we both love the movie. We're going to talk, though, about like what is the movie saying about religion, about theology, about ethics, about all these things. The movie's not been out for very long. If you haven't seen it, strongly recommend hitting pause. You can go see it in theaters, I believe, still, or if not, definitely you can see it online. I am an online watching movie apologist, so I'm not going to get into that debate here, but it is available in a lot of places. And if you're not going to watch the movie, well, just be known that, well, we're not going to give kind of like the full plot summary and all that. We are going to spoil quite a lot. And I will kind of just lay out the basics of it. Our hero is a man named Father Judd. He's a former boxer. He has had kind of a life on the streets for a while. After a really terrible incident in which someone died, he killed someone in the ring. He has kind of a moment of deciding he wants to give his life to Christ and to become a priest, and he becomes a Catholic priest. And he's wrestling through the movie that he still has that instinct to fight, to punch. And the movie starts with him punching out a deacon who everyone agrees was kind of a pretty terrible person, but also priests aren't supposed to punch people. So he's sent off to this church in a small town that's meant to be kind of a hard situation with a pastor who is just very much a hard case. And who is very much he calls himself Monsignor, not pastor or reverend. We'll discuss that in a minute. And is very much kind of the king of his own little castle. And if you're a person who follows the writings of people in the Christian nationalist movement, in the strong masculinity of Jesus movement, things like that, every line of dialogue that character says, played wonderfully by Josh Brolin, could have been taken straight from those things. They conflict with each other. He tries to kind of organize some people in the church against this, not maybe in the best way. It blows up in his face. And then the Monsignor is killed, is murdered. And it's a locked room mystery. And of course, along now comes Benoit Blanc. It's a Knives Out movie. And he gets to have a great time solving the murder. Our hero is framed for it. Starts to wonder if he did it, if he killed someone else as well. Eventually, it's revealed that there's just all sorts of terrible secrets being held in this community. That this Monsignor was just a horrible person who was planning to destroy the lives of a lot of the people in his community for greed and for money, and to go off and do his own thing. And people killed him to try and stop that. Other people got killed along the way. And in kind of the penultimate moment of the movie, Benoit Blanc has talked a lot about, if you've seen other Knives Out movies, how much he loves to give the oration where he wins over his opponent, and he gives his monologue of, here's the whodunit, I've solved the case, I've proven to this person, I've made them confess, I've shown the evidence, look, police, go and arrest them. And in a moment, he has what he calls his own road to Damascus moment. He's very much an atheist, and that does not change in the course of the movie, which I think is a very important point. But he realizes that, as he says, he can't be the one to solve the mystery. Because as it turns out, the person who did the killing is kind of just needing that one last push to confess, is feeling the guilt, has already taken poison that's going to end her life. But he's able to step back, give room for her to give her confession to Father Judd, and in so kind of like wrap everything up. And then what I think is a really important coda, because there's a sense of like, has the great Benoit Blanc, atheist, seen the light and decided religion maybe is pretty okay. He's invited to mass, and he says, nope, nothing I would less like to do, and walks out, and the movie ends. For you, what was it like watching this movie?
You'll have to ask my husband, because apparently I kept hitting him.
Yeah.
Saying how this was now my new favorite movie and I loved everything about it. So yeah. I think that, but I also, I think it was both being so fascinated by some of the choices that Rian Johnson was making. And then also, like, I wept at the end. Like, the last 5 minutes or so, I was not just a little bit crying, but really crying. And I don't think I have ever seen a more profound depiction of my sense of vocation as a priest on screen. And I, the very beginning, like the first scenes of the movie where they have Pastor Judd taking the Monsignor's confession, which is like a whole thing I want to unpack, to his visitation stole, like his little purple stole is exactly the same. Like I have that exact stole in my visitation kit. I like one side is purple, one side is white, depending on whether you're taking confessions or doing a funeral. And that's fine, but that bit of realism, I thought from the very beginning of the movie, it was like, oh, I have that stole. And then it was just like, oh, this whole depiction of this guy's understanding of the priesthood profoundly resonates with me.
Yeah, I think I'm in a very similar place. A lot of liturgy, not so much. I'm a person who grew up in an interfaith home. We were Christmas and Easter Christians and kind of the equivalent of Jews as well. And so my father's Judaism is still an important part of who I am. I'm religiously Christian. And I first found kind of a faith community in an Episcopal church, and I loved it, and it was wonderful. And I decided I had a vocation, and I thought about becoming a priest. And the reverend who I was working with said, "Great, and how do you feel about swearing an oath of loyalty to a bishop?" And I went, "Oh, hell no."
Yeah.
And so liturgically
I respect that.
Yeah. Liturgically and polity-wise, I ran all the way to the other end of the spectrum, the United Church of Christ, very low church, where I loved the polity but missed some of the high liturgy sometimes. Episcopals, just incredibly quick history lesson, but if you don't know this, watch The Tudors. Honestly, is the best probably example of it. But basically, if you remember, Henry VIII broke with the Church of Rome, started his own Church of England, which was in many ways not supposed to be the Protestant Reformation, but somewhat was, but somewhat wasn't. Again, watch The Tudors, goes into a whole history of it. But the resulting church was the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church now has, and then formed separate churches in many of the places in the British Empire, now the British Commonwealth, one of which is the Episcopal Church in America. And that's what you are part of, correct?
I am, but I was ordained in the Anglican Church of Canada.
Oh, cool.
So that's my fun background.
Cool. And so let me actually start there, because there's an awful lot of the theology and the liturgy of this movie that really resonated with me. But my tradition does not have a tradition of confession. Not in a liturgical, you are kind of having a therapy session, but you're talking to this other person and thus through them to God and being blessed. So talk to me about what confession means for you and sort of how you saw the role it plays in this movie, because it's obviously an incredibly important part of this movie.
I think confession has the potential to be incredibly profound. Before we started recording, I was saying, the slogan that we sometimes use in the Episcopal Church about confession is all may, some should, none must. Right. So confession, sacramental confession, is open to everyone who is invited to participate in it. Some people, it would probably be very good for them, and then no one has to. It's not a requirement for anyone. And I think that's really key. The times that I have gone to confession myself have often been when I am deeply struggling with something and need to talk very openly and honestly. And I think hearing words of absolution is deeply powerful. For me, the sacraments and the rituals of the church are visible signs of grace, right? So I think it is a concession to us being human beings that we need to hear those formal words of absolution. So it is a gift as opposed to being a burden.
Right.
And I think, it's very interesting, right? In the confession scene at the beginning, which is sort of the Monsignor messing with the younger priest as well.
Monsignor Wicks, by the way. I didn't say
Monsignor Wicks,
yeah.
Messing with the younger priest. And, we hear these sort of rote absolutions of, okay, go say 5 Hail Marys, whatever.
Right.
The times when I have found confession most meaningful are when I have spoken with a priest where the penance given is something that is actually trying to make right whatever I have confessed, right? If I am times that I have confessed something about a personal conflict or how I have treated someone, the penance is, right, what is something kind you can do for them? How do you actually do something that demonstrates the change of heart? And I have been less moved by the times when I have confessed to a priest and they've just said, go read this psalm or pray this
Right.
prayer. That, and so when I have had the privilege to hear confession, and what I find interesting working on a college campus is I have had more college students come to me
Mm,
seeking to have formal confession than, non-student types, as we call them in
right.
our congregations sometimes. That I do think there is something where young people need spaces to feel unburdened.
Right.
And so when I have the privilege to hear confession, I also try to make that um, absolution and penance something in that sense of
Right.
how do you make restitution? How do you actually reconcile? Not just a rote prayer you say because you're
Right.
supposed to say a prayer.
Now, I'm going to imagine that an awful lot of our audience already have started bristling a bit. Because
I
the
can
idea,
imagine,
and
yes.
I think that's something the movie's very well aware of. And that's why I wanted to start here. I think for a lot of people, and I'll admit for myself included, the idea of confession, particularly in the Catholic Church, often carries with it a lot of our most negative feelings about church and Christianity as it exists in the world today. First of all, the idea that it's like sexual sin that has to be confessed, and just a lot of the awful sex negative ideas. In it, as you said, Monsignor is screwing with him. One of the things he does is he confesses in great detail all the times he masturbated. He's really just trying to make this other guy uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, but also just it can carry almost like two different attacks that I think are made against Christianity that I think are pretty fair for the most part. One of which being the guilt and the idea of trying to control people by reminding them that we are sinners in the hands of an angry God and we are terrible and wrong and you have to confess before your priest and your God and thus keep the power of the priest and all that. And also the idea on the flip side of, oh, it's okay if you're a terrible person because as long as you confess, don't worry about it. You're a big capitalist, but you confess that you feel bad about what's happening to your workers. Say 5 Hail Marys, and you're going to be fine. Um, what do you again think of the way the movie uses confession, given all that history and stuff like that, and given all of that, I think very legit critique people have, and the way, fairly or unfairly, confession has become kind of a symbol of that worst part of Christianity in our world today.
I think you raise really good points, right? And I have said many times that I think for that the teachings around forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
is both one of the best and worst things that Christianity has to offer,
Yeah.
because I think we desperately need forgiveness. We both need to
Mm-hmm.
receive it and we need to be able to give it. And yet, let's be real about the ways that teachings around forgiveness is weaponized, particularly around marginalized people,
Yep.
right? And I think that's very real. I think the confession is what you say about confession in the film is interesting. In the end, you mentioned Benoit Blanc having his Damascus moment of, I cannot solve this crime because he wants to give. So the crime is
Mm-hmm.
the done by Martha, the faithful church secretary, and the one who has been the priest's most ardent defender this whole time.
Yep.
Uh, be- to give her the freedom and the choice to confess
Yeah.
and be unburdened at the end. And that he's the one, when she comes into the church and Father Judd is like, what do I do? And
Yeah.
Blanc says, be her priest. I think it is recognizing that capacity of confession to be either a gift or a weapon,
Yeah.
right? It can be a gift of grace. And we can talk about the name grace in
Yep.
this film and the role of grace. It can be either a tool of grace or a tool of power.
Yeah. And
And
we
I
see
and I
that
think it's both.
and we see that even more explicitly because one of the kind of central parts of this mystery is that there was a huge fortune tied up with the keeping of this church. The grandfather of the Monsignor Wicks had a great family fortune. His daughter was, in the words of the movie, a harlot and a whore. They just call her the harlot whore. And there's all sorts of misogyny that we're definitely going to talk about wrapped up in how that's treated. That she has a son, the father's not known, and that's Monsignor Wicks, and that the grandfather uses that potential money as a control to keep the mother in the house, keep raising the son. with the hope that with a promise that she'll get the money. He breaks that promise and decides to end his life and remove the money in a way that no one can find. They buy an incredibly valuable gem, and he swallows it. This is where there's some parts in the movie where you sort of think, I don't think a gem would survive the human digestive system very well
No.
and keep all its value. But putting that aside, we can have a little,
I'm a,
hand-waviness.
I'm a romance reader, and we talk about romance reasons, and you accept it. This is murder mystery. For murder mystery reasons, we accept.
Exactly. So, anyway, the point being that, like, Martha knows where that gem is, and it's a secret that she's kept, and she's often felt very guilty about how she treated this woman, denying her that secret and all that. And she goes to confess it to Monsignor, and basically, people often think about, like, the secrecy of the priesthood, and that, like, if you confess something, the priest can't be made to testify about it. Part of it's also the idea that the priest isn't going to take personal advantage of it. And Martha finds out that that's exactly, she's like,
Yeah.
I feel so bad about I buried $80 million in this specific place. And instead of saying, let me talk to you about your guilt, the pastor goes, oh, there's $80 million that I could go have. And he goes off on it. So yeah, I never even gone that far, but I think that description of confession as a weapon and confession as healing grace is really shown so well in this movie.
Yeah. Well, and I think guilt, right? Look at the character of Martha. Guilt is destructive.
Yeah.
Guilt that is kept bottled up, guilt that is not released is just, it's destructive to her, it's destructive to the church, it's destructive to the community. We need ways of releasing guilt.
And let's talk about her for a second, because
Yeah.
one of the critiques I think that people often make about Christianity that I think is very, very fair, and I've made it, and you make it great length and very well, is about misogyny that is so often wrapped up in it, and that it's very wrapped up in, like, I want to say it's very wrapped up in the evangelical movement and Christian nationalism, but
it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And her being named Martha feels very significant to me. There's a story in the Bible about Mary and Martha, and Martha feeling like women are only supposed to do what women are supposed to do, and Mary is the one, and Mary is sitting at the master's feet. And there's all sorts of connotations to that story that we can get into. But just like there are two major women characters in this. There's a couple of others, but at the heart of this story of the misogyny, Martha and Grace. Talk about what you think this movie was saying and how it resonated with you about misogyny in the church and how sexuality of women, especially, is deeded in the church through these two women.
Well, I will say that, and I think this one came from my husband, that obviously Martha had to be the one to do the crime, because only a church secretary would have the organizational skill to concoct a crime with as much administrative work involved as this one, right? But I mean, the church has relied on the labor of women forever, right? I mean, I used to have this conversation so before I came to my current role, I was in a larger multi-staff, like, church in Midtown Toronto. And I loved the senior priest that I worked with was a deeply good pastor and a very great mentor to me. Right. So I don't mean this to disparage him, but one thing that we used to get into is he would talk about how the church was run by women, and he took pride in how much of, like, the administrative staff and the pastoral support was women, and the church is run by women. I'm like, but dude, you're still the boss.
Yeah.
Right? Like, at the end of the day, you're still the boss. So it's not really, patriarchy is still being upheld.
And I think there's a real parallel there between the unpaid labor of the home and the unpaid labor of the church.
100%.
You think about, like, women, especially, people who are stay-at-home mothers or housewives or things like that, like, it's thought of like, oh, the husband has to do the work, she just gets to stay at home all day. No, she's doing the laundry, she's doing all the cooking, she's doing the child care, she's doing all the planning of the house and the budgets 100%. And all that kind of stuff. And in many ways, sometimes they're paid. I think Martha is a paid person in some ways, but often they're volunteers, and often they're being paid something, and their volunteer hours are, like, they're being severely underpaid, or not being paid at all, or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And especially in the Catholic Church, and they name this to some extent in the movie, so I don't feel like I'm pulling this out of thin air, where priests are not supposed to be married, women volunteers do a lot of that kind of unpaid work of
Oh
preparing his
yeah,
meals and doing his
100%.
laundry and like
Yeah.
theoretically nothing of the sexual romantic, although certainly that
No.
happens sometimes. But you know, they say like she cooks all of his meals and all that kind of stuff.
Men aren't supposed to be married. The priests aren't supposed to be married, but they all have housekeepers.
Yeah, basically. And where do you see that in her story in terms of like the because um you know, for me, it felt like that one of the things that comes to a head is that she has all this guilt. She also has all this resentment because of it, because she's put so much in to her belief in the goodness of Monsignor Wicks, and then when it crumbles, she
She has nothing
shatters.
else. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's, and I mean, you bring up the story of Mary and Martha, and I think it's so important. And I struggle with that story so much. I hate
yeah,
it when it comes up in the lectionary because I think it's so hard to preach.
yeah,
Um, because I appreciate, but there is something about the woman Mary sitting at the feet of the teacher in a role that is a male role in that world, right? So there
yeah,
is a permission granted for women to assume the role of disciple, which I think is important. But it's also this Martha is both vilified, she's vilified for doing what is imposed on her
right,
for in that world. I mean, it goes back, everybody wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes,
yeah,
right? Like that work is so important, and yet we demean it.
yeah.
And we
She's
demean
vilified and
we
she's dismissed in a way of
she's
like,
vilified and dismissed. And I understand the point of the story in there is something higher that you can be, right? There is a learning that we are called to, but it seems so unfair to disparage a woman for doing the work
yeah,
that she has been given to do and that someone has to do,
right,
right? Um, and so I think it's a really difficult text,
yeah.
and one that I struggle with as a
You,
priest and as a woman
you,
a lot.
you kind of wish that there was the like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with Mary doing this, but Barnabas, you're not paying attention to what I said, so why don't you go help Martha?
Why
You
don't
know,
you go
like,
do the dishes, right?
like
I mean,
so no one went to that.
that's the thing. You know, we and I think this is part of the challenge of like real feminism. You know, there is the feminism that feeds into patriarchy because it encourages women to take on roles traditionally associated with men, which is I'm a priest. I'm very grateful for that. I wouldn't be a
Yeah,
priest otherwise if we hadn't had that movement of feminism. But then we also have to talk about like, okay, what is the unglamorous work that has traditionally been associated with women, and do we
right.
continue to dismiss and demean
Yeah.
that?
And
And
I do podcasting as kind of a side gig, but my wife is wonderfully successful in her field of computer science, which is
mhm.
happily very well rewarded. And so I'm mostly a house husband and a stay-at-home parent these days. So yeah, I don't get
And
that
my
very much.
husband is also mostly a house husband and a stay-at-home husband. So
Isn't he also the mayor of a town?
he's also the mayor of our town. Yes,
Okay,
that was a
but
recent development. But it's also
that's fair.
our town has like 1,000 people. It is a
That's
very
fair.
part-time gig.
I like that idea. You know, side gig like you do a side gig like podcasting a bit or doing some
Like
laundry for other
we
people or being a mayor. You know.
we are there. It is we are a village by
Yeah,
Ohio municipal law.
I love it. I love it. Well, and so talk more about and so the she has this conflict that's at the heart of the dark past of this church with Grace. And Grace, as I said, we are only ever introduced to through the memory of everyone else, which is very dark and very and but again, like to me, Ryan Johnson understands filmmaking so well because he does that thing where it's someone's narration of it, but still we're getting to see it. And so there's an incredible
Yeah.
scene where they talk about that when Grace realizes that no one's going to give her the money, she comes in to destroy the church. And we're clearly being told it's because she's lost in sexual sin and she's degenerate and of Satan. But the way it's
Well,
shot,
we don't know. We don't know at that point that she's destroying the church because she lost the money. Like in that initial shot.
oh, that's right, that's right. We just know that she did it.
That's the revelation at the end is
Right.
because
It was denied her. Yeah.
she was denied, and she was looking for it. But what we think at the very beginning is that she's just tearing up the church because she hates God and she hates the church and
Right.
is an
And
agent of Satan.
but it's done in this way where she comes in a white negligee,
Yeah.
and the moon is behind, and she looks like an avenging angel, and
Yeah.
it's like you're being told she's so terrible, but the setup and the lighting makes us want to root for her.
Yeah.
Talk.
Well, and I keep Grace a is like we have such a sanitized idea of grace.
Hmm.
Is grace threatening?
Well,
Is
and
grace destructive
and
of
again,
things that need to be destroyed?
for our non-theological audience, what is grace? We're talking about like the noun grace, not the name of a person.
Yeah. As in, like, what do we? I mean, I wonder
I'm
if.
asking you to do an entire theology course in two
Oh,
sentences, but
so
yeah.
you're asking me? I thought you were saying like
Oh
hypothesizing
no, I'm
of
saying I
what
think a lot of
people
our
might.
audience may not
Yeah,
really be familiar with that term anymore.
grace is unearned mercy,
Hmm.
right? Grace is the hope of forgiveness, redemption.
Right.
I don't know. How would you define grace in a?
I mean, I'm from a church tradition that ran away pretty hard from it because it's one of
Yeah.
those like mystical concepts that we didn't want to wrestle with much. I'm very
Mm,
much a parables guy,
yeah.
you know, but I think it's something that is missing a lot from, and
Mm,
yeah, I think that idea of unearned mercy, and I'm also just embracing this idea that mercy doesn't have to be earned,
yeah.
that forgiveness. And it's funny because on this podcast we talk so much about redemption stories and who does
Mm,
or doesn't, and how I've talked about someone like Vader to me has a redemptive moment, but does not earn. He does not have a redemptive arc, whereas like
yes.
Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender to me does. But
Yeah.
grace is the idea of you don't need that. That I can find love and forgive you, even when it's not necessarily earned. And how powerful and how important that can be, and then that gets wrapped up in a lot of Christology about Christ being the graceful sacrifice of God for our
Mhm.
sins, and that being very problematic. I think both you and I kind of.
And there's one that I grew up with, which was grace is God's righteousness at Christ's expense. And I hate that. I hate
Yeah,
that
no,
with
no,
every
no, no.
fiber of my
That's
being.
not the idea of like I am so angry, so I have to hit someone, so I'm going to hit my own
No.
son instead of hitting.
Yeah.
All that's god awful, literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the you know, what to you does the character of grace represent? Because sin is such a big thing in this church and in the church in general, but so often it comes down to sexual sin. So often
Well,
it comes
yeah.
down to whether it was in the 50s and the hate, or hate of women having sex before they're married, or sex out of wedlock, or single motherhood. Now to all of that still, but also queer people or trans people. You're all degenerates. You're all pedophiles. What is this movie saying and pointing out that you think is important about the way that too much of the church frames sin and sexuality and all that?
Well, I mean, it's totally about controlling women,
Yeah.
right? Especially. And it is very much you're right. There's a whole, we can talk about various genders and same sex relationships and like
Hmm.
across how people identify. I think this in the character of Grace and Martha as well. It's very fixated on. I think Ryan Johnson is looking at how the church is treating women through the lens of patriarchy, right? And I think it's very much about control, right? The Monsignor wants to control.
Right.
That is what patriarchy is about. And I think it is interesting that Grace can't be controlled.
Right.
And Grace, I do think there is something threatening about Grace,
Hmm.
to the established order. One of the things I talk about a lot, right? When I talk about not believing in hell and the hope of
Right.
universal salvation. Man, that makes people mad.
Oh
It
yeah.
is so interesting to me how angry that makes some people
Well,
because we are so afraid of someone getting away with something.
yeah.
And I think that grace literally comes in to destroy the church is a
Yeah.
fascinating image.
I think we hear that so often in our own world. All the logic about, you know, this person might have lived 30 years as a wonderful American, but they broke the law. They're coming to the country. They can't get away from it.
Yeah.
But especially around sexuality. And I remember when I
Hmm.
was, one of my first pastorships was with a nonprofit. You may be familiar with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I worked with them for a long time. And one thing I'd hear a lot of time talking about, like, why there can be religious arguments for birth control and abortion when needed or when wanted and all the kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Um, and when you really dug down to it, the people on the other side, a lot of what they were afraid of was they were convinced that there had to be consequences
Absolutely.
for sex.
Yes.
And of course,
Oh my
who bears those
gosh.
consequences? Women. And then with
Women.
STIs,
Women and people who
queers, and
can get pregnant.
well, people can get pregnant, and then later people can get AIDS,
Yeah.
which is their STI. And so
Yep.
giving away condoms, birth control, abortion, all of that takes away that punishment. And I
I
think that,
remember,
go
oh,
ahead.
so good. Go ahead.
No, please.
No, I remember being like 5 years old and a family friend had AIDS. And I mean, I did not, right? This would have been I'm old. So this would
Yeah.
have been in the 80s. And obviously understanding this backwards to, right? Having
Yeah.
AIDS in the AIDS crisis. And I remember asking myself or asking my mom what happened, like why he
Right.
was sick, and being told, well, he did bad things
Yeah.
and God is punishing him. Like I remember being told that by my
Yeah.
family. And I mean, it was years later that I put the pieces together to actually understand. But it's 100% there. The idea that there needs to be consequences. The concern. I spent a lot of time in the pro-life movement when I was in
Mm-hmm.
high school and college, and absolutely, the idea was you women need to be punished.
Yeah.
And it's the same people who will talk about children being a blessing who are like, but it's a punishment and a consequence. So pick
Yeah.
a lane. Pick a
And
lane.
and I think it's so true, and I think it's something that applies across the board. And you obviously can speak much better on this than I can, but we kind of introduce the topic and let you run with it. That often from someone from a Martha's perspective, that's often very tied into like her role in the church and what she might want to do otherwise. Because,
Yeah.
a lot of my friends who are women pastors, and even some who are women rabbis have talked about how some of the hardest attacks they've gotten is from the women in the church who were themselves told, you can't be a pastor, you can't be a rabbi, you can't be this. Um, and then are angry at those who can because you're not, this is a person doing what they've always been told they can't do.
Yeah.
And just kind of putting it all the way across, in my first marriage, my wife became a nurse, and I remember, I would have female pastors over for dinner and stuff like that with their families. We would be talking, and they'd be talking about what they were going through, and my first wife would pop up about how she would hear a similar thing from older female nurses about women doctors and never trust
Hmm.
a woman doctor, and it was that same kind of a thing of and like the resentment is very real and very understandable. And I don't want to be attacking it, but I think Martha is such a good sign of that. Like she cannot question the pastor because, maybe she would have wanted to be a pastor, or maybe she's had this role in the church, whatever it is. And she has always known she's not allowed to break it. And so seeing other people break it is just not acceptable to her.
Absolutely right, and that comes back to the danger of grace. That
Right.
grace is dangerous and grace is threatening, especially if we have lived
Right.
within the prescribed boxes. Because
Right.
the idea of grace means that that Martha didn't ever have to be
Yeah.
trapped in that box.
And I think for me, one of the most powerful parts of the movie, and I want to get to Benoit Blanc himself because there's so much
Yeah.
with his story and with Father
Yes.
Judd. Um, but the fact that like she basically she's through him confessing to God. Like that's the
Oh yeah.
idea of confession.
Absolutely. Yes.
But there's an element to which of it's personal because part of what she did was frame him.
Yeah.
And she does specifically apologize to him as part of that.
Yes.
And he does not personally forgive her.
Mm,
He gives her God's absolution. And I thought,
yeah.
to me, that wasn't him saying, I don't forgive you. It was just he was able to take himself out of it entirely in a way that, like, to me is powerful because I don't think he would have been personally ready to forgive her. And I think that's okay. But he was able to
100%.
remind her that they both believe in a God who does forgive her.
Yeah, that is so real. And I think that's something that I've talked about with people before, right? Especially if you're someone who's been in an abusive relationship or you've been deeply hurt by someone. Maybe you can't get to a point of forgiving them yourself, but maybe you
Right.
can pray for God to.
Right.
I think there's a lot, I take a lot of solace from the words of Christ on the cross. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Like
Yeah.
we can put our trust in God as the one who bears the burden of forgiveness and grace, and sometimes the best we can do is open ourselves to that, even if we can't quite get there ourselves yet.
Yeah. No, I think it's so true. And so let's now turn to Father Judd because he embodies, I think, so much of the message of this movie. And I can't demonstrate this over our podcast, but he does this great physical gesture where he talks about how as a boxer, his reaction was always like to put his fists up, and that he wants to move from that gesture to the open-handed, warm embrace of Christ. And he talks about, like, someone says to him at one point, like, we want, when they're sending him to this new church, they say, well, we kind of want you to have that fighting spirit because the world is a wolf and you are the shepherd. And that, like, you're supposed to
Mm,
protect your people from the world. And he says in this wonderful response, you believe that, and soon everyone you don't understand is a wolf.
yeah.
Um, and that theology is one that the Monsignor preaches all the time, that the world is terrible and we have to fight it. We have to be warriors for Christ. What do you think is going on in Judd's kind of journey of this, of fighting his own desire to fight back and the embracing of the idea of not seeing the world as the enemy?
I mean, I think that's the I like that they don't just have him overcome that temptation really easily,
Yeah,
right? I think it'd be very a much simpler film to just have had him as a former boxer who killed someone who had had a profound conversion and now was so easily moving to this open theology of love. But that
yeah,
the impulse to protectiveness is so palpable and that it's human. I like that it's not necessarily aggression, right? The arms up
yeah,
in defense is not necessarily aggression. It is self-defense.
right.
And that, while it's natural and understandable, becomes a destructive
Yeah,
tendency. How easily fear leads to very Star Wars here. Fear leads
oh
to
yeah,
anger, anger leads to hate, right? Um, that we have to wrestle with the impulse to protect. But that leads to, they talk about the congregation and the flock becoming so calcified. It
right,
has reduced to this like tiny core of people because everyone else has been pushed away.
right.
And so while that's a very understandable, very human impulse, it is one that becomes incredibly destructive. And there's risk. There is risk involved in the open arms. You do risk being hurt.
Yeah,
And I think it's part of it. And again we go back to grace is destructive. Or not
right.
destructive. That's maybe not, but grace is threatening.
Yeah,
Grace is scary. And that we want to control grace, and so we want to control God. And there is risk inherent in the open arms.
yeah. No, definitely. I think
I can
that.
I talk about my favorite shot? I don't know if this leads into my favorite shot
Please
in the
do.
film, which I mentioned in my TikTok about this, but the scene where former sexy priest Andrew Scott, right?
Yes.
Former sexy priest, hot priest, is this author, very patriarchal author character, right? Who is writing
Oh,
his spiritual manifesto about how great Monsignor Wicks is. And he has his line about how we don't need some pussy who's just going to lie down and take it. We need a warrior with the crucifix right over his shoulder,
yep.
right?
It is
Christ,
so
and
perfectly
it's
done.
you're just like Ryan Johnson. You're not a subtle man, but is inherent in the open arms of crossed on the Christ is sacrifice.
Right.
It is death.
Yeah. And I think that's so much of what this movie's about, and that for a lot of the movie, he part of the point is that when someone's fighting you, it's very easy to fight back, and he doesn't
Yeah.
like, and that again, that can be taken to a place of therefore always turn the other cheek and let them walk all
Mm-hmm.
over you and let them hurt you, and that's not what this movie's about at
No.
all. Like, I think it is very clear that in Martha's dying confession, she's literally already taken steps to end her life.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter. But I think he very clearly would have said, I grant you God's absolution. You are forgiven of your sins. And now let me walk you over to this police officer because you are
Right,
still going to be tried for
exactly.
murder. And
You're
like,
still going to be, yeah, you still have
yeah.
some comeuppance due
And,
you.
and like, I assume you and I both have a lot of the same problems with the prison industrial system and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But still, I think that, it doesn't mean like, okay, you're forgiven, go out into the world and
No.
like everything's fine.
Yeah.
That there has to be some idea of how do you both forgive someone for the harm they've caused while protecting yourself and others from the harm that they cause and the harm that you may cause and all that kind of stuff.
Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different realities.
Right?
We can forgive without being reconciled.
Yeah. I was no contact with one of my parents for a long time, and I forgave
Yeah.
them probably about 6 months before I resumed contact with them.
Yeah.
And that was important. But in regard to this stuff, like there's one moment in particular that I think I misunderstood. I think I misunderstood the first time and better understood the second time. But tell me what you think, because at one point he resolved that he wants to start not fighting the pastor necessarily, but trying to offer a different direction for the church. And so he brings together people for a prayer meeting, a prayer circle. And it feels very innocuous at first and very kind of like we're just doing, but everyone is super suspicious and they judge him and they misunderstand him. And it comes up that he didn't actually tell the Monsignor that he was meaning to do this.
Yeah.
And it's presented as that was just a totally innocent mistake, no big deal, and it's totally wrong for everyone to get so mad about it. And at first I was like, I think this writing is a little off because I think any pastor would know you shouldn't really do that. You should, of course. And the second time I watched it, I realized, no, I think this is actually intentional. It's that's the problem, is that he's not trying to help the church at this point. He's trying to fight Monsignor for the church.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it is his way of punching back. Like he describes that the Monsignor's confessions are a punch. There's both literal punching and so metaphorically, it's his way of punching back, and that's part of what he has to realize. He's being drawn back into this fight mechanism, and that's what he has to get away from.
That's real. I haven't really thought about that at all, but I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think what it raises is the really challenging question of how do we fight then the Monsignor Wicks of the world? How do we resist them without falling into the same tools?
Yeah.
I think is the real, I wish I had an easy answer for that.
Yeah.
But I think that's the challenge.
Yeah. No, I think so. And of course, there's this kind of preeminent moment that's been talked about so much. I want us just to quickly touch on the theology of it, but I think it's almost kind of the lowest hanging fruit. But it's such a powerful moment in this movie, which is when he is at his most sort of distraught and focused on his problems and focused on, and I don't mean like he's navel gazing. He's under threat of going to jail for murder he didn't commit. He's
got some legit things going on.
He's got legit concerns, and he's got legitimate reasons to be like, screw this church. They're rejecting me entirely. And he's talking to this woman who, in his mind, is just, and I'm going to get very theological here for a second. I'm a huge fan of the theological writings of a Jewish scholar of the 19th century, Martin Buber.
Okay.
And Martin Buber talked a lot about the difference between the I-thou or the I-it versus the I-I relationship. And that the I-thou is, I see you in terms of the purpose you have in my life. You are the person who sells me my groceries. You are the person who gives me sexual gratification. You are the person who picks up my laundry. And you don't see them as having their own interiority and stuff like that. And I feel like that's exactly what happens. And the I is like recognizing the full humanity. He is talking to a person who holds a piece of information, one of the clues that him and Benoit Blanc need to solve this mystery. And there's no reason. She is a random person on a phone from a different town, a different construction. He has no reason beyond just basic humanity to see her as anything like that. And she's being, I deal with customer service all the time. I try to be as polite as I can.
Yeah.
And I think customer service people are totally, they have a horrible job. I have all the sympathy in the world. But when you're trying to speak to someone and they keep interrupting with irrelevancies, it's kind of annoying. And that's exactly what she does. And he's annoyed at her, and he's a bit, cross with her, and finally gets her to give him the answer. And he's like, okay, thank you. That's what I needed to know. And she says, Pastor, can I say one last thing? And he's like, oh, fine, but can you make it quick? And she says, Pastor, can you pray for me? And it's revealed that she's in this hard situation, which I think anybody who's dealt with parents who are in elder care has dealt with in some way or another. Of her mother is losing cognitive function, and so is saying things that maybe she doesn't mean, but maybe she does, but she's never said it. She said something hurtful. The daughter said something hurtful back. She's worried her mother might die while they're angry at each other. She's worried that she hurt her mother or that her mother hurt her. She feels very alone. How did you react to that scene?
Oh God, it was one of the scenes that made me want to cry. It was not,
Yeah.
I don't know that I cried then, but I mean, just that it becomes so earnest so quickly, and him walking out and shutting the door and just going into pastoral mode so quickly. And I mean, I think, I don't know if this matches your experience,
Mm-hmm.
but like, part of being a priest is so weird because the tone of your life can change so swiftly
Yeah.
based on a phone call. And you do, like, I have had these strange moments where someone will realize that I am a priest, and suddenly, I mean, I'm not saying it has happened all of the time,
Right.
but I think most people in some who function as a religious leader of some kind have probably had some form of this experience where suddenly someone just feels like they can tell you something, or they need
Right.
that moment of listening or reassurance, and you have a choice of how to respond. um, and he manages to be a priest in that moment, and it's so very real, and again, so very human.
Yeah.
And I think coming after his, he has kind of a whole rant at Benoit Blanc about, this is all a game to you. Like, you want
Right.
your checkmate moment. You want to find out who this is not real.
Right.
And I mean, it matters solving a murder, but praying with someone who's struggling with losing their mother and afraid about the last thing they said to her,
Yeah.
that is real.
Yeah. And it is such a powerful moment. And it feels like to me in many ways, all of this kind of almost a commentary on the first Knives Out movie, which I don't know if you've seen or seen
Mm.
in a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I decided to watch it again last night just to get it in my mind. And it's interesting because in that one, there's the same dynamic of a patriarch of the family who has a huge amount of money and is deciding what to do with it. And
Yeah.
in that movie, all of the kids are truly awful, as are some of their kids.
Yes.
And but there's this, and it seems like a lot of it is probably in some ways related to how the grandfather has treated all of them, how the father treated
Sure.
them. But he never has any guilt about it. Like he has that,
No.
oh, I'm sorry I did that. But you know what? Now they're terrible. I'm just going to cut them off and give all the money to this other person. And to Benoit Blanc, he's like, yeah, sure, because they all look terrible. The nurse looks great. Sure, she should get all the money. And I think we all agree with that. But then I felt like
And the
in this,
patriarch is never really criticized in Benoit Blanc.
exactly.
Like, he's not really held up as the figure of critique.
Right. It's like, okay, well, one of your sons spent his entire life attached to you, running your business,
Right.
never going on his own. And he's sort of like, well, I should have cut him off before. I'm going to cut him off now.
Yeah.
But then there's no like, but what about the damage you did? How do you account
Right.
for that? And in this, the fact that it is a patriarch who is like, Grace is maybe kind of like, in a different version of this movie, Grace could be looked at as the spoiled child of a person with money. And
Yeah.
there's probably some element of that, but she is very much portrayed as the victim here. And again, in this one, it's about Benoit having the game, because what Benoit, to me, when I watch Knives Out, the first one, great movie, I love it.
Love
And I want someone to solve the murder, but then I want someone with family systems theory, like therapy background, to go in and work with this very broken family.
Yeah.
Who are, some of them are terrible people, some of them are not great people, but they're all struggling with loss and with grief and with animosity, all having to do with being raised in this ridiculous situation.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what Judd is doing there. Is he's sort of saying like, yes, solving the mystery matters, and he wishes them good luck. He's not like, go away and don't solve
Yeah.
it. And certainly, please make sure I don't go to jail for it.
That would
But
be
he's like,
nice. I would like to not go to jail. Yeah.
but what he cares about is all these broken people who are dealing with the loss of their patriarch now.
And I like that. I mean, I think it's a really good observation that this is a film that has compassion for its characters in a way the original Knives Out doesn't.
Right.
And I love the original Knives Out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think the woman who is suffering from the chronic illness, who gives all of her money to the church, right? We haven't talked about her.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to pour out so much of herself in
Mm-hmm.
the church, in this like hope of miraculous healing being dangled out
Yeah.
to her. And instead, the miracle of her healing is finding the gift of endurance.
Right.
Uh,
And,
I love that.
and I have to say, as someone who I have some degree of chronic pain, but also I have a very specific disability. I have an amputation. But
Mhm.
one of my romantic partners, I'm polyamorous, deals with chronic pain in an ongoing way, very much similar to what happened in this movie in terms of never having found like an answer. I was gonna be really mad if she was cured
Mm,
in some way, and I loved that ending.
yeah.
And she says, I think, one of the most theologically important lines in the movie at one point, and she's saying it to Benoit Blanc, who is very much not a pastor, but he like goes up into the pulpit to say,
Yes.
to give his oration about who solved it, and he's going through all these details, and he says, or she says to him, "Can't you just give us the answer? Isn't that what all of this is
Yes.
for?" She's
Yeah.
talking about the mystery, but to me, what I was immediately reminded of is one of my favorite sayings that I think came from a professor of mine. I may have come up with it myself. I don't think so. But it's the idea that people go to religion when they have hard questions, and the
Hmm.
worst thing religion can do is give them easy answers.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was such a she's saying it to Benoit Blanc there, but it's such a metaphor for what the church, what society should be. Of our role is to help people wrestle with questions, not give them simple answers.
Which comes back to the whole genre of a murder mystery, because the whole point of a murder mystery is to give a simple answer,
Right.
right? That is what is satisfying in the mystery genre, which brings us to that. Can we talk about Benoit Blanc's Damascus moment
Yeah.
at this point? And you mentioned him going up in the pulpit, and I was reminded of a video I saw from one of my TikTok mutuals who is like, follow her, the Connie Chen,
Uh huh.
incredible analysis. But she had a very nuanced and complicated take on this movie. But she talks about Blanc going up into the pulpit, and that's what he rejects. Right? He has his Damascus moment, realizing that he cannot solve the case. Not that he is physically incapable of solving the case, but he cannot
Right.
continue to perpetuate and act in that role of patriarchal authority by speaking for grace, speaking over grace, as has been done, not Grace, Martha,
Right.
as has been done for her entire life, and comes down from the pulpit. And that the film is not a binary of religion versus atheism, or religion versus reason, logic,
Right.
whatever. The villain of the film is the pulpit, is the symbol
Yeah.
of authority, right? That is
It's
what is
religious power
rejected.
in a lot
It's
of ways.
religious, but it's patriarchal power as well,
Yeah.
right? And I think it is, Benoit Blanc has his Damascus moment is not religious conversion. His Damascus moment is realizing how his own, fixation on the checkmate moment and his great declamation of the whodunit is itself participating in that system of authority,
Right.
is a kind of patriarchal
It,
power.
it's a compassion moment because it's a moment of
Yeah.
recognizing
Yeah.
that, sometimes compassion is realizing like, yeah, like I could get some joy telling this joke, but I see that my friend is kind of starting to tell it and I want to let them have that joy, or for whatever reason,
Mm,
and that, it's exactly that. It's him realizing, yes, he could have the checkmate moment. And this is going to come at a cost to him. It's not just that he doesn't
yes.
get a benefit. It's that one of the other people, who's definitely one of the most terrible, records a
Yeah.
video of him admitting that he can't solve it in a
And
way that
puts it
he's
online.
and puts it online in a way to prove, look, it's a miracle, which is, and to own Blanc.
Yeah.
But he's willing to kind of it is a sacrificial act for someone else
It
and
is.
for
It is
the
a loss for
sinner in
him.
the movie.
Yeah. It is a loss for him to the person who doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And I love that he says he was inspired by the foolish act of grace from Father Judd, because there is this moment where, when the Monsignor's body is found, Judd hides his flask of alcohol,
Right.
like in this last moment attempt even though he hates, like Judd hates this Monsignor,
Right.
but even in that moment is trying to protect his image
Yeah.
and hides the flask of alcohol, which ends up posing a problem to the case because it turns out the flask was drugged. And Blanc rails him
Right.
for leaving it, for his omission of that. And it's that act of mercy, of
Right.
grace that is undeserved and foolish. That is what it's the witness of Father Judd that inspires Blanc
Right.
to his Damascus moment.
So let's talk about Blanc for just a bit. We're already an hour. I don't want to keep you
I
too
know,
long.
sorry.
No. This has been such a great conversation. We'll do this and then Star Wars and wrap up. But because we've been very positive about Christianity in this movie and talked about a lot of ways in which the movie seems to be, but I think it's very important to understand the movie is also incredibly critical,
Yes.
and for very good reasons. And Blanc, there's a point where, in a very classic kind of movie moment, Judd is on his knees and saying, "Jesus, I need a sign. I need you to send me some kind of help." And then the door opens and Benoit Blanc walks in. And we all know he's a detective, but he's acting as though he's just a random guy walking into a church on a Saturday afternoon and not letting Judd know that he's there to, begin the police procedure with him. And Judd treats him like a visitor to the church and trying to be exactly the opposite and being open-minded. And he's not evangelizing to the guy, but he's kind of like, well, I'm kind of curious. So he's like, tell me what the church makes you feel. And he's being like, you've probably had this moment. I certainly have had, and I think it's very important. Lots of people, when they find out that I'm a Christian and that I used to be a pastor, want to tell me all the things they have against Christianity. And I've seen a lot of people
apologize for swearing.
Or apologize for swearing. I will say, I don't know if this was true for you. I was single for a long time as a pastor, and wow, it was dating was ridiculous. But and I think that's very fair. And I think in this case it's not, but I think it's easy to get defensive. Judd is not that, but he kind of gently says, like, what does the church make you feel? And Benoit at first is trying to be polite, and he talks about the architecture is interesting, but then he has this great little speech, and he says, I feel the grandeur, the mystery, and the emotional effect it's supposed to have on me. And it's like someone has shown a story at me I do not believe. It's built upon the empty promise of a child's fairy tale filled with malevolence and misogyny and homophobia, and it's justified untold acts of violence and cruelty, while all the while and still hiding its own shameful acts. I don't think a single word of that is false.
No. But I also loved Father Judd's response to it.
Right.
Which was kind of to say, you're right.
Yeah.
But can we learn something from, like, what is the story?
Right.
What actually is the point of the story that I liked his line that this, his response that the church is neo-Gothic and has more in common with Disneyland than the cathedrals of Europe.
Yeah.
But I think how do we create space for both of those perspectives on the church to be true?
Right. How do we acknowledge all? Because I do think one thing that I think a lot of us, like progressive Christians, leftist Christians, whatever you want to say, can be guilty of, and I know I was like this, is a kind of like, oh no, they're not real Christians, or I'm not like those.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, it was realizing that it was a not all men moment. That it was I have to realize, like, I'm non-binary, but I present as masculine. I've been masculinized in many ways. I have to account for I'm part of a group that's done terrible things. Same as a white person, same as a colonizer in America, same as being a Christian. Which gets me all the way to The Last Jedi.
Okay, great.
And tell me if you think this is a similar connection. And because there's a couple. First of all, I'll just sort of throw as an aside. There's one moment where Cy, the videotaping person, who's a right-wing personality, a terrible person, and he has this idea that him and the Monsignor, who's proven to be his actual father, because obviously, like the Monsignor had sexual.
Yeah, we didn't even get into all of that.
There's so much there. And that he's like, we're going to burn all this down and we're going to rebuild the church and we're going to make Monsignor president and we're going to basically rule. And he literally says, as father, like father and son.
Yes, as father and son, yeah.
And Judd says, like in Star Wars. And he goes, yeah, we're the rebels. And Judd rolls his eyes because it's clearly a moment of like a lot of people on the right wing who clearly don't understand Star Wars, that the whole point is to fight against Vader's like, we will rule the galaxy. To me, that was Rian Johnson having a little bit of this horrible set of fandom has attacked me in my movie for years. I'm going to get him back a little bit. But the main point I was going to make is, so the point being that he comes to a point of saying, like as you say, Judd is kind of saying, and he's not saying, Benoit, thus you should be a Christian. He's very clearly saying, he's saying why I am part of it. But he's saying, as I think you were just saying, can we both recognize all the failures, recognize all the problems, and still find enough goodness that we want to not ignore those things, seek accountability for those things, but still continue to rebuild and move on. And I rewatched Last Jedi, and I heard Luke saying we have to destroy the Jedi. You have to be the last Jedi. But then saying we have to keep the sacred texts. And Yoda saying, no, let the old die, but let the Jedi continue to be rebuilt while we take accountability for the fact that the Jedi let Palpatine. It's the same message, isn't it?
It's the same message. And this goes back to, the fandom and the church and the same forces at work wrestling with, again, patriarchy and who wants to control a narrative.
Right. Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, about kind of, you said you're a Last Jedi apologist, because I imagine it's so wrapped up in all these questions we're talking about.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think you can talk about ways in which The Last Jedi is an imperfect film, maybe like technically, but for me, it's the only movie of the sequel trilogy that actually tried to do something, that actually tried to say something. I'm also a vague Force Awakens apologist, just because, again, I think for me, seeing a woman protagonist in the sort of chosen one role, I loved. But I think it's about who controls narratives. I am a Rey nobody versus Rey Palpatine. I think the story of the sequel trilogy would have been so much stronger if Rey had just been no one.
Yeah.
Like the last shot of The Last Jedi of the random kid Force picking up the broom.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that you've had that we're allowed to question the Jedi, right? Like Star Wars fandom, the Jedi have been the good guys, the people who the fandom venerates, and you recognize how they have participated in these systems of power and authority. And even Luke Skywalker, we can question for being a flawed hero. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean Luke Skywalker is terrible. It means he is a flawed hero.
Yeah.
It makes him a more interesting character. And, the fanboys can't handle Luke Skywalker being problematized.
He has to be the strong masculine.
He has to be. So it's warrior. Again, does the Star Wars saga have to be the Skywalker saga? Does it have to be rooted in this people? Or can the Star Wars saga be everyone's story? And that is where Rey being a nobody would have been such a powerful point to land on.
Yeah, as well as just getting away from the idea of chosen one and that you have to be part of a sacred lineage and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
And pulling it back.
And Rey Palpatine was just stupid.
Yes, fully agree. Totally with you on all that.
I had a lot of nuanced takes, and then I just had to say that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on all of that. And I think for me, it was a very revelatory moment when he says all that, because I had been kind of a very critical person of the Jedi. And when I look, and I'm not an Anakin apologist by any means, but I think there's a lot of ways in which, the failures of the Jedi and all that. And I think more than anything, I'm a big believer in across the board, blind obedience being a terrible thing, blind faith being a terrible thing. I am proud to be an American while recognizing the incredible failures and horribleness of my country. One of my theological heroes was an East Coast pastor named Robert McAfee Brown, who was very active in the anti-Vietnam War movement and the Civil Rights movement. And when he was asked one time, why do you hate America so much? He said, I don't hate America. I'm having a lover's quarrel with America. And that kind of, it is only the things you most love that you call into accountability. And I feel that way about Christianity. I feel that way about the Jedi. I feel that way about all these institutions. And it's, I'll sort of kind of wrap this up and then leave you with any closing thoughts. I don't do confession, but I certainly had lots of moments, where I would like do, pray with someone or have someone come in for pastoral counseling or whatever it was. It's not therapy, and it's very important.
Hmm.
People know that, but we do like 1 or 2 sessions, and I'd have people talk about, and they would kind of inch up carefully to it. And if they ever actually said they were angry at God, they would apologize so quickly.
Yeah.
Did you have that as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
What do you,
people need to be given permission to be angry at God.
yeah.
And I always say God can take it.
Yeah. And to me, it's why I love the Psalms, because the Psalms are a
Yeah,
lot of people yelling and screaming at God because terrible things have
absolutely.
happened. And I think that's, to me, that's another part of this movie, is just the kind of recognition of like, it, all of these emotions can be part of a sacred experience, religious experience, but also don't have to. And actually, maybe that's the kind of question I'll wrap up with, is for you, what's the importance of Benoit Blanc, who is the main character of this trilogy, if not necessarily this movie, um, having that road to Damascus moment, having this experience where he understands Judd's priesthood in a way he really didn't before, and seeing the power of it, and then still saying at the end, thanks, but no thanks. I absolutely don't want to stay for Mass. Why do you think that's important for this movie?
Because it's not about conversion.
Yeah.
And I think it is I think it is fascinating to take a character like Benoit Blanc and have him learn something. Like, I don't know that Benoit Blanc learned or grew as a character in either of the two previous Knives Out
Yeah.
films. I feel like he learned something in this, which I think is fascinating. And I think because it's a movie about patriarchy, right? It is a
Yeah.
movie about patriarchy. It is a movie about authority. It's not really a movie about religion.
Right.
Religion can be a vehicle for patriarchy, 100%. I think it is about recognizing that Benoit Blanc, the very character of the detective who knows everything and solves everything and ties everything together in a bow and has his big monologue at the end, is itself is a kind of like, right, is playing into that sense of the great man fallacy. So I feel like it's
Yep.
much more about that than it is about Benoit Blanc being converted. And I think it's worth having. I've heard a lot of conversations from people, especially in this like deconstruction community, pushing against like the overly optimistic
Mm-hmm.
of the movie. The idea of, we haven't talked about the apple literally being in Jesus at the end, that the cross is rebuilt and
Mm-hmm.
the diamond is put in the cross. And I think that for me, that was right, like all of our human temptation to evil and desire for what we can get for ourselves is transformed in
Right.
the open arms of Christ on the cross. Also, the reading that within the foundation of the newly built church is the core of human sin.
Yeah.
I think both of those things can be true. I think the fact that Father Judd renames the church. It is no longer Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude, but Our Lady of Perpetual Grace. The pulpit is still there,
Right.
right? And that temptation to whether Judd will ascend the pulpit is always going to be there. So I think the reality that those of us who see a core of maybe pure or more authentic Christianity in this film and in the depiction of Father Judd, we still have to be on guard against those temptations
Very
to
much so.
authority. And those of us, especially, who are still participating in the institutions of the church, I'm literally here in my
Mm-hmm.
collar, have to be really always aware
Vigilant. Yeah.
of of vigilant of how those systems can be used for harm or good, right? I'm not an anti-institutionalist, or I wouldn't be a priest.
Right.
Um,
But we have
but
to be aware of that
to
possibility.
beware. Yeah.
And I think that's where, I looked it up later. And like, Ryan Johnson is not a Christian. He's an
Nope.
ex-evangelical. He grew up in a very conservative, I don't know evangelical actually, but he grew up in a very conservative household and kind
Yeah.
of walked away from it, but still wrestles with it. And one of my favorite lines from The Last Jedi that I do think is because obviously a lot of Luke's anger at the Jedi he kind of steps back from, but this one line I think is held true, is he says that one of the hubrises of the Jedi was believing that they were the only path to the light side of the Force.
Yes.
And
Yes.
to me, that is 100% a missile aimed at the heart of Christianity.
Yeah.
The idea that it is only through us that we get to God. And
Absolutely.
a lot of Christians would still say that it's through Christianity, but it doesn't have to be through the church or through the priest.
Mm-hmm.
I myself am very much a universalist, and I kind of believe that like Christianity takes me to the same place that Judaism takes others, and Islam takes others, and Buddhism takes others, and transcendental meditation or Star Wars or Star Trek takes someone else. Like, to me, all the paths are great. But I think that's all, to me, that's a big part of what makes this movie work, is I don't ever think, I feel like it is saying, hey, wait a minute, there is this strain of Christianity that's out there that often gets ignored, and that's important because there's something hopeful, but it is absolutely not what you have to be a part of. You don't have to be a part of any faith tradition. It's just, it's knowing that it's there, and what can we learn from it the way that anyone can learn anything from the religious stories of any people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think about it, one of my best friends comes to my church and sometimes sings in the choir when we need a tenor. He's an atheist, very
Yep.
openly. I always like to think, what can he take away from my sermons? And I hope that he takes something.
Yeah.
Right. I want to preach in such a way that, we have the Jewish spouse of one of my congregation members comes to our church.
Uh-huh.
I hope that I can preach.
We just lost your audio. I cannot hear you. Give me a thumbs up if, yep. I think you're on mute. Can you try hitting unmute? There's a button at the bottom. On the bottom left of your screen, there should be a microphone button that probably is muted. You can click that and unmute yourself. Oh no. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, I can hear you.
I can't hear you. Give me a second.
Okay.
I got my camera. I've got.
You probably just have
It
to
says
reset everything.
I just can't. I'm getting you.
Okay, you can hear
All
me?
right, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I'm so sorry.
Okay. No, don't worry about it. These things
I
happen.
can't hear you at all, and I don't know why.
Okay. These things happen. Hold on. These things happen and I can cover it up, period. Why don't you just assume that I said thank you so much for being on the podcast and give your kind of closing sign off where you can say any last thoughts you have about the movie and also tell people more of how they can find your stuff. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Let me give you a chance to have any other last thoughts you have on the movie and also just kind of wrap us up and tell people more about how they can find you.
Hold on. See if they. All right, I'm trying to see.
All right. Can you hear me?
Default AirPod. Okay.
Yep. Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry, my AirPods died, but I put
Okay.
it back in my case for a couple seconds. So I think we got a little bit of life back in.
All right. So
I was trying to go back through the audio settings and get it to work, but they weren't cooperating. So sorry about that.
let me just give you a quick chance to do a sign off, and then we'll go. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm sure there's so much more we could all say, and I definitely would love to have you back as a guest if you'd like to be. But why don't you kind of, if you want to give your last thoughts about this conversation and this movie, and also let people know where they can find more of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love this movie. I think there's so much to unpack, and I think I love seeing such a thoughtful and nuanced take on faith and religion. And I always love seeing Benoit Blanc. Yeah, I am the Nerdy Priest on TikTok and Instagram and Blue Sky, and you can check out my book that's coming out in the
Oh,
spring,
wonderful.
Nerd Faith. Yeah, from
Oh,
Morehouse Publishing, and so my website is nerdypriest.com. There's more on
awesome.
there.
Awesome. Yeah,
Thank you thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. We'd love to have you back. To our audience, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear more about your thoughts on this movie, how you felt about it, how you felt about the discussion of faith and religion, whether you are a person of faith or whether it's not a thing for you, which is, again, totally fine. Love to hear your thoughts. Please check out all the other things that you can find all the ways to contact us on the website, theethicalpanda.com. There you'll also find information about my other podcasts, Star Wars Generations podcast, and The Once and Future Parent, where myself and Pete and Mandy talk about my adventures as a new parent. So please check all those things out. Hope you have a wonderful holiday, whatever that means to you. And most importantly, we have spoken.